welcome back. So it's again the same day for me, and look, my hair's not dry yet. It's working on it, but it's still not there. All right, so today we're going to read 5, 6, and 7. So it's 3 chapters today, but they're very short chapters, okay? So here we go. Will she stay? Will she go? What will happen? We don't know. Oh, it's a rhyme. Will she stay? Will she go? What will happen? We don't know. All right, let's continue. Oh my. Okay. The sheep made Sarah smile. She sank her fingers into their thick, coarse wool. She talked to them, running with the lambs, letting them suck on her fingers. Sarah named them after her favorite aunts, Harriet and Mattie and Lou. She lay down in the field beside them and sang Summer is a-comin' in. Summer is a-comin' in. Her voice drifted over the meadow grasses, carried by the wind. She cried when we found a lamb that had died, and she shouted and shook her fists at the turkey buzzards that came from nowhere to eat it. She would not let Caleb or me come near. And that night Papa went with a shovel to bury the sheep and a lantern to bring Sarah back. She sat on the porch alone. Nick crept up to lean against her knees. After dinner, Sarah drew pictures to send home to Maine. She began a charcoal drawing of the fields, rolling like the sea rolled. She drew a sheep whose ears were too big, and she drew a windmill. Windmill was my first word, said Caleb. Papa told me so. Mine was flower, I said. What was yours, Sarah? Dune, she said. Dune? Caleb looked up. In Maine, said Sarah, there are rock cliffs that rise up at the edge of the sea, and there are hills covered with pine and spruce trees, green with needles. But William and I found a sand dune all our own. It was soft and sparkling with bits of mica, and when we were little, we would slide down the dune into the water. Caleb looked out the window. We have no dunes here, he said. Papa stood up. Yes, we do, he said. He took the lantern and we went out the door to the barn. We do? Caleb called after him. He ran ahead. Sarah and I followed, the dogs close behind. Next to the barn, Papa's mound of hay for bedding, nearly half as tall as the barn, covered with a canvas to keep the rain from rotting it. Papa carried the wooden ladder from the barn and leaned it against the hay. There, he smiled at Sarah, our dune. Sarah was very quiet. The dogs looked up at her waiting. Seal brushed against her legs, her tail in the air. Caleb reached over and took her hand. It looks high up, he said. Are you scared, Sarah? Scared? Scared? Exclaimed Sarah. You bet I'm not scared. She climbed the ladder and Nick began to bark. She climbed to the very top of the hay and sat, looking down at us. Above, the stars were coming out. Papa piled the bed of loose hay below with his pitchfork. The light of the lantern made his eyes shine when he smiled up at Sarah. Fine, called Papa. Fine, said Sarah. She lifted her arms over her head and slid down, down, down into the soft hay. She lay laughing as the dogs rolled beside her. What a good dune! Was it a good dune? Called Caleb. Yes, said Sarah. It was a fine dune. Caleb and I climbed up and slid down, and Sarah did it 3 more times. At last Papa slid down too, as the sky grew darker and the stars blinked like fireflies. We were covered with hay and dust, and we sneezed. In the kitchen, Caleb and I washed in the big wooden tub, and Sarah drew more pictures to send to William. One was of Papa, his hair curly and full of hay. She drew Caleb sliding down the hay, his arms like Sarah's over his head, and she drew a picture of me in the tub, my hair long and straight and wet. She looked at her drawings of the fields for a long time. "Something is missing," she told Caleb. "Something," and she put it away. "Dear William," Sarah read to us by lantern light that night. "Sliding down our dune of hay is almost as fine as sliding down the sand dunes into the sea." Caleb smiled at me across the table. He said nothing, but his mouth formed the words I had heard too. Our dune. The days grew longer, chapter 6. Chapter 6. The days grew longer, the cows moved close to the pond where the water was cool, and there were trees. Papa taught Sarah how to plow the fields, guiding the plow behind Jack and old Bessie, the reins around her neck. When the chores were done, we sat in the meadow with the sheep, Sarah beside us, watching Papa finish. "Tell me about winter," said Sarah. Old Bess nodded her head as she walked, but we could hear Papa speak sharply to Jack. "Jack doesn't like work," said Caleb. "He wants to be here in the sweet grass with us." "I don't blame him," said Sarah. She lay back in the grass with her arms under her head. "Tell me about winter," she said again. "Winter is cold here," said Caleb, and Sarah and I laughed. "Winter is cold everywhere," I said. "Not in Hawaii." "We go to school in winter," said Caleb. "Sums and writing and books," he sang. "I am good at sums and writing," said Sarah. "I love books. How do you get to school?" "Papa drives us in the wagon, or we walk the 3 miles." 3 miles. "When there is not too much snow." Sarah sat up. "Do you get lots of snow?" "Lots and lots and lots of snow," chanted Caleb, rolling around in the grass. "Sometimes we have to dig our way out to feed the animals." "In Maine, the barns are attached to the houses sometimes," said Sarah. Caleb grinned. "So you could have a cow to Sunday supper?" Sarah and I laughed. "When there are bad storms, Papa ties a rope from the house to the barn so no one will get lost," said Caleb. I frowned. I loved winter. "There is ice on the windows on winter mornings," I told Sarah. "We can draw sparkling pictures, and we can see our breath in the air. Papa builds a warm fire, and we bake hot biscuits and put on hundreds of sweaters. And if the snow is too high, we stay home from school and make snow people." Sarah lay back in the tall grass again, her face nearly hidden. "And is there wind?" she asked. "Do you like wind?" asked Caleb. "There is wind by the sea," said Sarah. "There is wind here," said Caleb happily. "It blows the snow and brings tumbleweeds and makes the sheep run. Wind and wind and wind." Caleb stood up and ran like the wind, and the sheep ran after him. Sarah and I watched him jump over rocks and gullies, and the sheep behind him, stiff-legged and fast. He circled the field, the sun making the top of his hair golden. He collapsed next to Sarah, and the lambs pushed their wet noses into us. "Hello, Lou," said Sarah, smiling. "Hello, Mattie." The sun rose higher, and Pa stopped to take off his hat and wipe his face with his sleeve. "I'm hot," said Sarah. "I can't wait for winter wind. Let's swim." "Swim where?" I asked her. "I can't swim," said Caleb. "Can't swim!" exclaimed Sarah. "I'll teach you in the cow pond." "That's for cows!" I cried. but Sarah had grabbed our hands and we were running through the fields, ducking under the fence to the far pond. Shoo, cow, Sarah said as the cows looked up startled. She took off her dress and waded into the water in her petticoat. Okay, so she has like stuff on underneath. They used to dress in a lot of layers, okay? She dived suddenly and disappeared for a moment as Caleb and I watched. She came up laughing, her hair streaming free. Water beads sat on her shoulders. She tried to teach us how to float. I sank like a bucket filled with water and came up sputtering. But Caleb lay on his back and learned how to blow streams of water high in the air like a whale. The cows stood on the banks of the pond and stared and stopped their chewing. Let me read that one again. So sorry. The cows stood on the banks of the pond and stared and stopped their chewing. Water bugs circled us. Is this like the sea? Asked Caleb. Sarah treaded water. The sea is salt, said Sarah. It stretches out as far as you can see. It glimmers like the sun on glass. There are waves. Like this? Asked Caleb, and he pushed a wave at Sarah, making her choke and laugh. Yes, she said, like that. I held my breath and floated at last, looking up into the sky, afraid to speak. Crows flew over 3 in a row, and I could hear a killdeer in the field. Remember we learned in Little House on the Prairie that a killdeer is a kind of bird, right? All right. We climbed the banks and dried ourselves and lay in the grass again. The cows watched, their eyes sad in their dinner plate faces. So round faces like a dinner plate. That's what she means by their dinner plate faces. And that's a metaphor. Yeah. And I slept dreaming a perfect dream. The fields had turned to a sea that gleamed like sun on glass, and Sarah was happy. Chapter 7. The dandelions in the field had gone by, their heads soft as feathers. Okay, so when dandelions grow, they're yellow. And then as the dandelion dies, it leaves like the seeds there, which are the fluffy white part that you can blow and all the seeds fly. Even if you don't blow it, the seeds fly when the wind blows and it makes more dandelions because they're dandelion seeds. Okay, so that's what it means by gone by. So the dandelion yellow isn't there anymore, just the seeds. All right, the summer roses were open. Our neighbors, Matthew and Maggie, came to help Papa plow up a new field for corn. Sarah stood with us on the porch watching their wagon wind up the road, 2 horses pulling it and one tied in back. I remember the last time we stood here alone, Caleb and I, waiting for Sarah. Sarah's hair was in thick braids with that circled her head. Wild daisies tucked here and there. Papa had picked them for her. Old Bess and Jack ran along the inside of the fence, whickering at the new horses. Pa needed 5 horses for the big gang plow, Caleb told Sarah. Prairie grass is hard. Remember when Pa was trying to plow up the prairie grass and he kept getting it tangled in his plow, and then the prairie fire came and took care of that, right? All right, Matthew and Maggie came with their 2 children and a sack full of chickens. Maggie emptied the sack into the yard and 3 red Banty chickens clucked and scattered. Banty is a type of chicken. We actually had Banty chickens, wild Banty chickens, in our barn in Maine. When we lived there, they would like live in the rafters. And they'd make such a mess. And so they started bothering the neighbors, so we had to get rid of them. Okay? They are for you, she told Sarah, for eating. Sarah loved the chickens. She clucked back to them and fed them grain. They followed her shuffling and scratching primly in the dirt. I knew they would not be for eating. The children were young and named Rose and Violet after flowers. They hooted and laughed and chased the chickens who flew up to the porch roof. Then the dogs who crept quietly under the porch. Seal had long ago fled to the barn to sleep in the cool hay. Sarah and Maggie helped hitch the horses to the plow. Then they set up a big table in the shade of the barn, covering it with a quilt and a kettle of flowers in the middle. They sat on the porch while Caleb and Matthew and Papa began their morning of plowing. I mixed biscuit dough just inside the door watching. "You are lonely, yes?" asked Maggie in her soft voice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Slowly I stirred the dough. Maggie reached over and took Sarah's hand. "I miss the hills of Tennessee sometimes," she said. "Do you miss the hills, Maggie?" I thought. "I miss the sea," said Sarah. "Do you miss the hills? I'm sorry. Let me start that page over again. I'm really sorry. We're going to start over, okay? All right, here we go. I mixed biscuit dough just inside the door, watching. "You are lonely, yes?" asked Maggie in her soft voice. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Slowly I stirred the dough. Maggie reached over and took Sarah's hand. "I miss the hills of Tennessee sometimes," she said. "Do not miss the hills, Maggie," I thought. "I miss the sea," said Sarah. "Do not miss the hills. Do not miss the sea." I stirred and stirred the dough. "I miss my brother William," said Sarah, "but he is married. The house is hers now, not mine any longer. There are 3 old aunts who all squawk together like crows at dawn. I miss them too." "There are always things to miss," said Maggie, "no matter where you are." I looked out and saw Papa and Matthew and Caleb working. Rose and Violet ran in the fields. I felt something brush my leg and looked down at Nick's wagging tail. "I miss you, Nick," I whispered. "I would." I knelt down and scratched his ears. "I miss Mamma." "I nearly forgot," said Maggie on the porch. "I have something more for you." I carried the bowl outside and watched Maggie lift a low wooden box out of the wagon. "Plants," she said to Sarah, "for your garden." "My garden?" Sarah bent down to touch the plants. "Zinnias and marigolds and wild feverfew," said Maggie. "You must have a garden wherever you are." Sarah smiled. "I had a garden in Maine with dahlias and columbine and nasturtiums and the color of the sun when it sets." "I don't know if nasturtiums would grow here." "Try," said Maggie. "You must have a garden." We planted the flowers by the porch, turning over the soil and patting it around them and watering. Lottie and Nick came to sniff, and the chickens walked in the dirt, leaving prints. In the fields, the horses pulled the plow up and down under the hot summer sun. Maggie wiped her face, leaving a streak of dirt. "Soon you can drive your wagon over to my house, and I will give you more. I have Tansy." Sarah frowned. "I have never driven a wagon." "I can teach you," said Maggie, "and so can Anna and Caleb and Jacob." Sarah turned to me. "Can you?" she asked. "Can you drive a wagon?" I nodded. "And Caleb?" "Yes." "In Maine," Sarah said, "I would walk to town." "Here it is different," said Maggie. "Here you will drive." Way off in the sky, clouds gathered. Matthew and Papa and Caleb came in from the fields, their work done. We all ate in the shade. We are glad you are here, said Matthew to Sarah. A new friend. Maggie misses her friends sometimes. Sarah nodded. There was always something to miss, no matter where you are, she said, smiling at Maggie. Rose and Violet fell asleep in the grass, their bellies full of meat and greens and biscuits, and when it was time to go, Papa and Matthew lifted them into the wagon to sleep on blankets. Sarah walked slowly behind the wagon for a long time, waving, watching it disappear. Caleb and I ran to bring her back, the chickens running wildly behind her. What shall we name them? Asked Sarah, laughing as the chickens followed us into the house. I smiled. I was right. The chickens would not be for eating. And when Papa came just before the rain, Papa came just before the rain, bringing Sarah the first roses of summer. And that is all we have for today. We will finish the story up tomorrow. Maybe my hair will be dry, maybe not. All right, bye guys.